I woke up to chains on my driveway and a bright orange notice slapped on my front door saying Emergency HOA Authority Active Property Under Temporary Control, and before I could even process that sentence, a woman in a pink blazer was shouting my name through a megaphone like she owned the block, and that is how I learned my neighborhood had apparently been taken over overnight. This happened in Florida in a quiet suburb outside Tampa after a storm that was loud, dramatic, and gone in 8 hours. No flooding, no evacuations, no state of emergency, just broken branches and trash cans flipped over. But HOA Karen acted like a hurricane apocalypse had hit, and she was the chosen leader. I am standing there barefoot, coffee in hand, staring at this notice thinking this has to be a prank until two men wearing matching vests walk up my lawn with clipboards and reflective badges that say HOA Emergency Response Unit, and one of them tells me, "Sir, under emergency HOA bylaws you are required to vacate temporarily." That was my first red flag because I never signed anything like that. And my second red flag was the fact that one of the guys was wearing gym shorts under his vest. Karen steps forward smiling like she just won the lottery and tells me calmly that due to storm-related safety risks, the HOA has activated emergency takeover protocol and all affected properties are now under HOA management until further notice. I ask her who authorized this, and she says the board did. And when I ask which board, she pauses just long enough for me to notice the sweat on her forehead before saying the emergency board. People start coming out of their houses, confused, angry, scared, and Karen raises her megaphone again, telling everyone to remain calm, that this is for their own protection, and that refusal to comply could result in fines, liens, or immediate property seizure. That word seizure hits the street like a gunshot. An older neighbor starts crying. Another guy starts recording on his phone, and Karen immediately points at him and says recording is prohibited during emergency HOA operations, which is funny because I know for a fact that is not a thing. Here is the part that still makes my stomach drop. She had papers printed with official-looking seals, maps highlighted in red, and a timeline that showed our street labeled Phase 1 temporary acquisition. Temporary, my ass. She claims the storm exposed infrastructure weaknesses and that the HOA needs access to our homes to inspect, repair, and manage them. And while she is talking, I notice a moving truck parked at the end of the block with two guys loading furniture from a house whose owners are out of town. I realize in that moment, this is not about safety. This is about opportunity. At the 20-second mark, if you are watching this video, you would think this is just another HOA power trip. But right here is where it gets darker, because one of the fake officers leans in and whispers to me that if I sign the compliance form today, the fines will be waived. I look down at the form and see a clause buried in the middle that says temporary management may include rental, leasing, or resale authority. That means she was trying to legally flip our homes. I tell him I need to read it, and Karen snaps, saying refusal will be documented and escalated. And then she says something she should never have said. She tells the fake officer to activate the body cam. That is when I notice the small blinking light on his chest, and I smile for the first time all morning because Karen thought those cameras protected her. She had no idea they were about to destroy her. It ends right when I decided to play along, sign nothing, and start gathering evidence, because what I found out about that so-called emergency order would blow up the entire HOA and put Karen in real legal danger. I went inside, shut the door, and locked it slow like nothing was wrong, but my brain was on fire because the moment she said emergency takeover, I knew she was bluffing. Florida law does not hand out magic authority to HOA Karens just because the sky got loud for a night. I pulled out my laptop, opened the county website, and started digging because I had served in enough neighborhood committees to know how real emergencies work. And this was not it. There was no state declaration, no city order, no county memo, nothing. Zip. Meanwhile, outside, Karen was pacing the sidewalk, barking orders like a budget dictator, telling the fake officers to tag homes with orange tape and write unit numbers in Sharpie. And every house she tagged just happened to belong to people who were either elderly renters or out of town. That pattern hit me hard. He texted 3 neighbors telling them, do not sign anything, do not leave your house, and start recording discreetly. And one of them replied saying Karen had threatened a lien if they did not comply by sundown. That is when I knew this was not chaos. This was a schedule. I zoomed into the so-called emergency document she handed me earlier, and my stomach dropped. The seal on the bottom was not from Hillsborough County. It was from a dissolved HOA in a different city, one that shut down over a decade ago. She recycled a dead HOA. I printed the bylaws from our real HOA and highlighted every section that proved she had zero authority. And then I noticed something else, even scarier. The document she gave us listed herself as interim emergency director. Interim means temporary. Means she knew this was illegal. Illegal means she planned to disappear. At the 30-second mark of this story, you would expect me to call the cops. But here is the twist: I did, and they told me they had already received multiple calls and were told by someone claiming to represent the HOA legal team that it was a civil matter. She blocked the police. I walked outside acting calm and asked one of the fake officers where they were hired from, and he said a property services firm out of Miami, and then whispered that they were only contracted for 48 hours. 48 hours was all she needed to strip houses. Another neighbor pulled me aside shaking and said Karen told them FEMA approved temporary leasing of abandoned homes, and I almost laughed because FEMA does not do that ever. I asked Karen directly to show the FEMA paperwork, and she smiled wide and said it was confidential, and then leaned in and said, "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." That line right there told me everything. I walked back inside and did something she did not expect. I called the county emergency management office myself and put them on speaker while standing in my living room with the window open. The officer on the line said clearly, "There is no emergency authority granted to any HOA in your area, and no storm damage assessment has even been completed." It recorded that outside. Karen was yelling again, telling the fake officers to speed it up, and I saw them start removing appliances from the out-of-town house. That is theft. I sent the recording to a local investigative reporter I knew from years ago with one message: fake HOA emergency takeover happening right now. And within 10 minutes my phone rang. The reporter asked if I could get proof on camera. I looked outside at the body cams blinking red and realized Karen handed me the weapon herself. I stepped onto my porch, smiled, and said loud enough for the cameras to hear, "Can you confirm this emergency order came from the county?" Karen froze. The fake officers looked at each other and for the first time since the storm hit the street went dead silent, because everyone knew whatever happened next would decide who owned this neighborhood by nightfall. Karen recovered fast, too fast, like someone who practiced this lie in the mirror, because she laughed and said of course it came from the county, while stepping directly in front of the body cam like that would magically block sound. And then she waved a paper in the air and said documentation is on file. That is when the fake officer holding the camera shifted his weight and asked her quietly which file, because his voice cracked, and that crack was everything. I stepped closer and said, "You mean the file from the dissolved HOA you resurrected?" Because I checked the registry, and it has been dead since before TikTok existed, and the words were barely out of my mouth when her smile twitched. At this point, neighbors were fully locked and phones up, windows open, kids sitting on steps watching like it was Netflix live, and Karen realized she was losing the crowd, so she switched tactics. She pointed at me and yelled, "This man is interfering with an active emergency operation," and ordered the fake officers to escort me off my own property. One of them actually grabbed my arm and whispered, "I am sorry, man. We were told this was legit." And I told him, "Congrats, because you are on camera committing trespass," and suddenly his grip loosened. This is the 20 to 30-second drop-off point where most stories slow down, but this is where it detonated, because a black SUV rolled into the cul-de-sac unannounced, and out stepped a guy in khakis holding a tablet and wearing a lanyard that said Disaster Assessment Contractor. Karen lit up like she just saw salvation and rushed toward him, saying, "Thank God you are here. Tell them this is real." The guy looked confused, asked who she was, and then said he was contracted by the county to survey down trees 2 streets over, not seize houses, and Karen went pale. She tried to shush him, and he pulled back, saying, "Do not tell me to shush you, just try to put words in my mouth." And then he noticed the fake officers and asked why they were wearing enforcement vests. One of the officers said HOA emergency response, and the contractor laughed out loud, said that is not a thing, and that laugh cut deeper than yelling. Karen snapped. She screamed that the HOA had temporary jurisdiction and that anyone who questioned it would be fined and blacklisted from future repairs, and then she made her biggest mistake yet. She ordered the officers to remove the cameras. That sentence alone told the entire story. The officers hesitated, and one of them said, "We were told the cams stay on at all times," and Karen yelled louder, saying, "I am the authority here," and that is when the younger officer said something that changed everything. He said, "I already uploaded the footage." Karen froze like a statue. He explained that their company required automatic cloud upload every 30 minutes, and that everything from the megaphone threats to the furniture removal to the FEMA lie was already backed up. You could hear a pin drop. She turned on him, eyes wild, and hissed, "You are breaching contract." And he said calmly, "No, you breached the law." At that exact moment, my phone buzzed again, and the reporter texted, "We are 5 minutes out." Karen backed up, started stammering, saying this was all a misunderstanding, and tried to tear the orange notice off my door, but I stopped her and said, "Do not touch evidence." She looked at me with pure hatred and said, "You just ruined this neighborhood." I leaned in and said, "No, you tried to steal it." Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, not close yet, but coming, and Karen knew it because she bolted toward her car. It ends right there with her tires squealing out of the cul-de-sac, leaving behind fake officers, confused neighbors, stolen furniture, half-loaded, and a cloud server full of proof that was about to make this fake emergency very, very real. One of the officers said HOA emergency response, and the contractor laughed out loud, said that is not a thing, and that laugh cut deeper than yelling. Karen snapped. She screamed that the HOA had temporary jurisdiction and that anyone who questioned it would be fined and blacklisted from future repairs, and then she made her biggest mistake yet. She ordered the officers to remove the cameras. That sentence alone told the entire story. The officers hesitated, and one of them said, "We were told the cams stay on at all times," and Karen yelled louder, saying, "I am the authority here," and that is when the younger officer said something that changed everything. He said, "I already uploaded the footage." Karen froze like a statue. He explained that their company required automatic cloud upload every 30 minutes, and that everything from the megaphone threats to the furniture removal to the FEMA lie was already backed up. You could hear a pin drop. She turned on him, eyes wild, and hissed, "You are breaching contract." And he said calmly, "No, you breached the law." At that exact moment, my phone buzzed again, and the reporter texted, "We are 5 minutes out." Karen backed up, started stammering, saying this was all a misunderstanding, and tried to tear the orange notice off my door, but I stopped her and said, "Do not touch evidence." She looked at me with pure hatred and said, "You just ruined this neighborhood." I leaned in and said, "No, you tried to steal it." Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, not close yet, but coming, and Karen knew it because she bolted toward her car. It ends right there with her tires squealing out of the cul-de-sac, leaving behind fake officers, confused neighbors, stolen furniture, half-loaded, and a cloud server full of proof that was about to make this fake emergency very, very real. Karen did not get far because 5 minutes later her car was boxed in at the neighborhood exit by 2 actual sheriff cruisers, lights flashing slow and calm, which somehow made it more terrifying, and watching that happen felt unreal, like the moment in a movie where the villain realizes the script flipped. The reporter pulled up right behind them, jumped out, camera rolling, mic hot, no hesitation, and suddenly our quiet street turned into a crime scene, with neighbors narrating over each other, and the fake officers standing there like kids caught skipping school. One deputy asked who was in charge, and Karen tried to speak first, but the deputy held up a hand and said, "Ma'am, you can wait while we hear from the homeowners," and that sentence alone drained all the power from her voice. I stepped forward, handed over the printed bylaws, the county recording, and showed them the orange notices still taped to doors, and when the deputy read the words "Emergency Takeover Protocol," he raised his eyebrows and said, "I have never seen an HOA with that authority." The deputies split up fast. One went to the moving truck, another to the fake officers, and another stayed with Karen, who was now claiming she was under extreme stress and just trying to help the community. Classic. The moving truck driver admitted he was paid cash to remove items from specific houses and was told the owners had forfeited access temporarily, and when asked who told him that, he pointed straight at Karen. That is when the deputy asked her for proof of ownership transfer, and she said it was pending, and the deputy said pending is not a thing. At the midpoint of this story, you would expect Karen to get arrested right away, but here comes the twist. She tried to flip the blame onto the fake officers, claiming they impersonated authority without her knowledge. Bad move. Because the younger officer pulled out his phone, opened the cloud folder, and handed it straight to the deputy, and the first clip was Karen instructing them word for word to tag houses, enforce compliance, and threaten seizure. No editing, no cuts, no mercy. The reporter caught everything, including Karen trying to walk away again and being told to stay put, and I could tell in her eyes she knew it was over, but she still tried one last play. She accused me of harassment, said I orchestrated the chaos, and that I was obsessed with taking her down, and I laughed out loud, because that was the first honest thing she said all day. The deputy asked if she was part of the official HOA board, and I said yes, unfortunately, and then handed over screenshots of emails where she talked about monetizing storm events and temporary asset management. That phrase hit hard. Monetizing storms. The deputy read it twice. Behind us, neighbors were pulling out their own stories, fines, threats, intimidation, sudden rule changes, and it all started lining up like dominoes. Then the county emergency management officer arrived in person, not a call, not a statement, but a real uniformed official who said clearly there was no authorization, no emergency, no assessment, and no permission for any HOA action beyond debris cleanup. That sealed it. Karen was placed in handcuffs, not for everything yet, but for obstruction and suspected fraud, while further investigation continued. And when the cuffs clicked, I did not cheer, I just felt heavy, like months of stress fell off at once. As she was walked past me, she leaned in and whispered, "This isn't over." And I said, "It actually is, because nothing scares a Karen more than public records." It ends with the reporter asking me one final question on camera: "Do you think this happens elsewhere?" And I looked straight into the lens and said it already did. She just didn't expect someone to read the fine print. 3 weeks later, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, lighter, like the air itself finally unclenched, and that was when the real justice started rolling in, slow but heavy. Karen was officially removed from the HOA board by an emergency vote that did not involve fake megaphones, fake officers, or imaginary authority, and the irony of that was not lost on anyone. The county launched a full fraud investigation, not just into her, but into every emergency, fine, every lien thread, and every cash payment that moved during that storm window. And once subpoenas started flying, people came forward fast. Turns out this was not her first attempt. She had tried a smaller version of this scam 2 years earlier after a power outage and got away with it because no one questioned her paperwork, and that detail alone made the investigators furious. The fake officers flipped, immediately handed over contracts, texts, and payment records, and confirmed Karen promised them bonuses if certain houses were cleared quickly, and those houses just happened to be ones she planned to resell through a shell company registered under her cousin's name. That cousin cut a deal. The reporter's story aired on every local station and then went national, and suddenly HOA Emergency Takeover was trending, and my inbox exploded with messages from people across the country saying the same thing almost happened to them. The state stepped in. Florida passed an emergency clarification making it illegal for any HOA to claim emergency authority without direct written county approval, and the bill was nicknamed after her by the media, which I will admit felt poetic. Karen tried to sue me. That lawsuit died fast once discovery opened and her own emails showed intent, planning, and profit motive, and the judge dismissed it with prejudice, which is legal language for sit down and stop. The stolen furniture was returned, the fines were erased, and every homeowner received a written apology from the HOA attorney who replaced her, and that apology mentioned my name more than once. I never wanted to be the guy who fought an HOA, but I learned something important. Bullies rely on panic. Scammers rely on silence. Karens rely on no one pushing back. The storm did not destroy our neighborhood, but it exposed it, and when the clouds cleared, the fake authority washed away with the rain. Now every time thunder rolls, people joke about emergency takeovers, and we laugh because we know the truth. Power only works when people believe it. And this time, we didn't. That is how a fake HOA emergency ended with real consequences, and how one storm took down the loudest Karen this neighborhood will ever see. Comment which state you tuned in from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can take HOA down in America.